We have a whopping 237 people on already. We have about 450 people registered, so it's really exciting. So we're going to get started. Speakers who have access to mic and camera, just make sure you keep that off. So yeah, let's get going. Really nice to be in shared space with all of you today. I'm Annie Salsick. I'm with the Harley Consulting Group, and I'm here on behalf of the Annie EKC Foundation, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. For the next hour, we're going to be focusing on family engaged case planning in youth probation, what it is, why it's so important, and how it's part of a call for and movement toward broader probation transformation. Before we jump into the content, though, I want to offer a little bit of an introduction to this new platform that we're on. It's new for most of you, probably. It's good to try new things for all of us, and this platform offers some new features for us to play around with and new ways to interact and share information with each other. So right now, we're in what's called presentation mode of Remo. So you all are passive audience members during presentation mode. It's going to feel very similar in a lot of ways to a Zoom webinar. You won't have access on the bottom to the mic and camera unless you're a speaker and you're going to come on stage later. However, there are several ways that we really encourage you to interact and engage with everyone here while you're on. The first is through general chat. So if you go up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see chat. You can check on that, and you'll be able to put in anything you want. You see a lot of your peers here in this space are already putting in their name, where they're from. Feel free to do that. As we continue, put in reflections, reactions, anything you like. Another thing to the right, further down to the right, there's a Q&A section. So we invite you, we encourage you to put in questions as they come to your mind throughout this session. Don't hold them until the end. And also try to remember not to put them in the general chat because we may lose sight of them there. So put them in the question. Jared just did that as an example. And I'm going to show you, if you go up and click on Q&A and say you really like a question that someone puts in. If you go to the left of that question, there's a little caret that's labeled upvote. If you click on that, you'll see. So lots of people are upvoting Jared's statement. Please post questions here. So that's good practice. Do that for if that's a question that you're like, I really want this to be answered, because questions that have a lot of upvotes move to the top of the line when we get to that. Finally, we encourage you to let us know how you're feeling about what you're hearing. There are 3 emojis in the bottom. There's the thumbs up that we all know really well now. There's the hand clap to sort of elevate and celebrate something you hear. And then there's this new kind of inquisitive emoji. If there's something that you hear that's interesting to you, that could be defined numerous ways, click on that little inquisitive emoji. And we really do invite you to do that because it gives us a sense of how you're feeling about the content. If at any point you have technical questions or technical challenges, no questions are stupid, unaccepted, any of that. This is a new platform. It takes time to get used to it. You can go into the chat and private chat the help desk at any point, and we have a team here who's there to help you through any questions you have. All right, on to the content. Earlier this year, and you can, producers, you can go to the next slide. Perfect. Earlier this year, Casey released a practice guide on family engaged. The practice guide lays out the need for the family engaged case planning model. It describes what that model entails, and it offers some really helpful tools and tips to support the practice. We recommend that you dive into that practice guide if you haven't yet. The URL is on this slide. And Jackie or someone, if you wouldn't mind dropping it in the chat box as well, that would be great. On the webinar today, we are not going to be attempting to cover all the ground that is in the practice guide. We wouldn't have time, and it wouldn't be useful to anyone to try to cram that into an hour. What the speakers today are going to be doing is highlighting some core tenets, core and central tenets and aspects of family engaged case planning, so that no matter where you're coming from, no matter what jurisdiction you reside in, work in, live in, even if you're in a site that may not yet be ready to implement the entire model, we believe that these core tenets that we're going to be talking about today are ones that any site can and should be intentionally working toward with real commitment. So that's why we're going to be focusing on these today. So a little bit of a roadmap for the session. We're going to do some brief intros in a moment with our speakers, and then we're going to have some moderated questions and then time for questions and answers from you all. So what I'm going to do now, actually, if you, Raven, if you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. By the way, in case I forget later, I just want to give a big shout out to Raven, who's our key producer here in the background and making this all possible. So thank you, Raven, from KC Events. So you see the picture of all of the speakers and you see their titles here, but we're going to skip through that because we're going to actually just bring them onto the stage so that we can see them live and hear some brief introductions from them before we move forward. So speakers, Raven's going to bring you up to the stage. If you, when she does that, if you can just make sure to put your mic on and your camera on. Thanks, Anna. We'll give them a second to get settled. So Miracle and Jeanette, just make sure you turn your camera and your mic on as well. Perfect. All right, great. So this is your group of speakers, and I am genuinely very, very excited to have these four be with us today. It's a great group of people who are going to be sharing their thoughts, their insights, and their experiences with you today. We're going to do something a little bit different, and rather than read out bios and all the amazing things these people have done, that would take up a lot of time. We're going to do a bit of like a round robin introduction. So Miracle, if you can come back. But we'll start with a round robin introduction where we're asking each speaker to just share 2 to 3 things about why you're on this webinar today. What brings you here? So this is a little bit more of a personal touch, right? It's not the long resume. So they get to choose what are the 2 to 3 things that they want to share with you about why they're here today as speakers. So Steve, and I should say, this is the tricky thing. We've asked them to do 30 seconds or less. So it is a round robin as a way of an introductory point, and then you'll hear much more from them in a moment. So Steve, I'll turn to you first, 2 to 3 things. Oh, Steve, we can't hear you. I think your mute is on. Okay, try again. Still. So Steve, I'll turn to someone else in a minute because I know you have some tech support. So hold on because we can't hear you yet. Oh, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Great. Sorry about that. Thanks, Annie.
That's okay.
Hi, everyone. Steve Bishop with the Casey Foundation. My 2 to 3 things. So the first is that I'm a product of an under-resourced, over-surveyed community and the father of 2 Black young men. So I'm concerned about the harms that justice system involvement can cause. As a former probation officer and state policymaker, I also recognize the missed opportunities that systems usually miss in terms of having a transformative impact on young people who enter the system. So my role at Casey, I just really want to change the focus, the role, and kind of the narrative about what probation should be about and how it functions.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. I know it's hard to cram in that time. So that's perfect. Jeanette, can I turn to you next?
I'm a mom of a young person who walked the system. I live in a community that we talk about constantly. And I want to be part of a solution and change the narrative and the misconception of families that are impacted by the justice system and the wonderful talents and gifts that our young people do have.
Thank you, Jeanette. And there's hand clapping happening. People are giving you the emoji of hand clapping. Perfect. So I see Miracle has a bit of a poor connection now. So Anna, why don't we go to you and then we'll hope that Miracle will be back.
Sure. I'm here because of an unending belief in the power of people and young people in particular. I'm here because I believe that government actually has the capacity to do good by those they are trusted to serve. And last but not least, I am here because of Jeanette Bocanegra, because of our the commitment that she's made to this work and has held us accountable. That's part of why we do. We're trying to do what we do, as well as a lot of our staff. But it's about humanity. It's about trusting people.
Thank you so much, Ana. And Miracle, don't worry. Hopefully your video keeps coming in and out, but hopefully we'll be able to hear you. So go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Miracle. A couple of reasons why this work is very important. I was in the system, and I do believe by the grace of God and the fact that I had aligned certain people in my path that I was able to navigate my way out of the system to where now I can share my story. Another reason is I'm here to shake tables up. I'm here to really just take away the illusion that a lot of people in the system had or like clung onto, and really just get, like Jeanette said, be about the solution. And I'm here to work with you all and to figure that out.
Thank you, Miracle. I'm so glad your connection was working there for us to hear from you on that. Thank you for that. All right, so now we're gonna have questions for each of the speakers. So Steve, we're gonna start with you. So Ana, Miracle, and Jeanette, you can take off your cameras and your mics for now. And we'll just focus on Steve, and we can pull the slides back up. Actually, not quite yet, because I'm gonna go in a minute. So I'll ask you the question first, Steve. We can pull the slides up. So Steve, in your position at Casey, can you talk a little bit about what the vision of probation transformation is, and what the role of family engaged case planning plays in bringing that vision into reality? And I'm going to take my mic and camera off, and we can pull up the slides.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Annie. So I'll start with the back half of the question. Case planning is really central to probation transformation. In a lot of ways, I see case planning as a practice as really the heartbeat and kind of the narrative of a probation case. And so in a lot of ways, I think it's probably impossible to really transform juvenile probation if you aren't aligning your case planning practices with some of these key principles. So jumping to the first part, like what is the vision for probation transformation? There's really 5 things that you need to know, and you can see these on the screen. First, diversion, really maximizing opportunities for diversion, because we know that far too many young people are pulled into formal system involvement. Opportunities to refer them to community-led, community-based diversion programs and supports and services. So that's the first piece to get to the right population. Second, really reimagining the nature and the function of probation to make it relationship-based, time-limited intervention, and really making sure we're focused on the population of young people who would benefit most, and that being young people who have repeat serious arrest histories, complex needs, the young people that, for all of us who've been doing this work for so many years, really lose sleep at night trying to help improve their lives. And while we're doing that, making sure that we're also focused on not just that opportunity to help young people in the community, but having a clear eye on minimizing the use of confinement, and particularly out-of-home placement. So again, really right-sizing the system, understanding that we see stark disparities in our system. The deeper you go into the system, the more you see these disparities. And so really having a continued focus and intentionality about minimizing the use of out-of-home placement, particularly for youth of color. The fourth would be keeping race at the center of what we do. Unfortunately, the data continues to reveal that we have 2 systems of youth justice in this country, one for white youth, affluent youth, and another for youth of color and poorer youth, and particularly Black youth. So we have to make sure that we're grounding everything in culture and being really focused on racial equity in everything that we do. And the last one is really about community partnerships, the understanding and recognition that systems cannot do it alone. Formal systems and probation departments can't do it alone. To really help young people grow and succeed, it really requires an all hands on deck type of mentality, which means really tapping into the wisdom, experience, and assets of community leaders, community organizations, and those who've been most impacted by the system traditionally. So really grounding our work in that. Production, if you can go to the next slide, please. And so in that context, the case planning is one of 5 key practice areas that we talk about in terms of specific probation practice for transforming juvenile probation. But again, for me, case planning is really at the heart of this. And so the other kind of 4 practices really both set up the possibility to reach the full potential for family engaged case planning, and then also practices that are kind of nested within it. So the first I would say is that helps set up success for family engaged case planning is this idea that I mentioned on the last slide about having the right population. The level of intensity that's described, the level of background information that's gathered, collaborating with families and other stakeholders is really reserved for, again, those cases that represent the most complex risk and need. And so really having a clear focus on the right population so that we're not over servicing young people who could be diverted from the system. And then the other is minimizing court and probation conditions. I'll give a shout out here to the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. They've really taken a leadership role in this over the last several years, articulating a really clear vision from the judiciary perspective that court conditions should be minimized, and that the best way to approach a case is really to set up probation officers to be able to work with young people, to be able to work through a process where they collaboratively establish some goals and meet those expectations, and to not bog down young people and families with a whole long list of court conditions. So we really appreciate that perspective from the judiciary, and that's really necessary to help set up the type of collaborative family engaged case planning that we're talking about. And then the other 2 are really nested within the case planning, really utilizing incentives and opportunities to motivate young people, to help them be committed and tapped into their goals, and to work on that, and to eliminate confinement as a response to technical violations of probation. We know that from a youth development standpoint, that oftentimes with young people, it may be taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But we need to have patience and tolerance to work through that process, and also understand that the continued potential harms of secure confinement, both in secure detention or out-of-home placement facilities, and also understanding that the threat of confinement, the threat of loss of liberty really undermines your ability to reach young people, to be able to build relationships with them, and to establish the type of trust. So we really want to take that off the table. And in doing this type of case planning, it's really about assigning small caseloads so you can be focused on relationship building. And again, really tapping into the whole array of community partners, their wisdom, their assets, their passion that can help impact young people. Next slide, please. So just kind of wrapping up my piece of my response to this question. Just wanted to give some examples of like the traditional way of case planning versus what we're suggesting for this family engaged case planning process. You know, through the course of my career, I think I've seen an arc in terms of the way case planning typically operates in probation. We started off, and I think about when I started my career many years ago, case plans were typically just a reiteration of court conditions and probation rules. In recent years, most jurisdictions, I think, have evolved. But typically, it's still a reiteration of the findings from a risk assessment tool, and then also some smattering of court conditions. What we're talking about with family engaged case planning is really something different. So in a traditional sense, how it typically looks is, again, you have the findings from a risk assessment, you have court conditions, you have it in a form. It's usually meeting a young person and their family, presenting them with an already developed plan, checking in on them periodically about did they complete their community service, have they gone to treatment, and met their treatment goals, et cetera. Somewhere along the way, we may need a signature from a parent. So tracking down mom or another caregiver to get a signature. If we can talk through the case plan with them, great. Sometimes not, and we kind of just live with that. But we're talking about a very different prospect. And with family engaged case planning, for me, it's really about probation officers slowing down at the front end and really focusing on the relationship building, the inclusive nature of it. So it's really about identifying some common goals with young people and their families, hearing from youth so that you clearly understand what are they challenged by, what are their aspirations, and really incorporating their voice. Because if you don't know what they're committed to and what they're brought into, then you really are kind of off track from the beginning. And again, not just getting a signature from a parent on a developed case plan, but really hearing from the entire family, parents, guardians, caregivers, the entire circle of care for a young person that may have input on what their past successes and challenges are and what they can bring to the table to help support them in their growth. We'd also say really setting the stage at the beginning that the goal is growth and success, not compliance with the court order, not just meeting the treatment goals, but really helping a young person succeed and grow. And I think establishing that up front really sets a different framework and ability to form a different type of relationship. And the last thing I'll just say is about this role of probation officer. Dr. Brian Lovins, who's the president of the American Probation and Parole Association, I think talks about this beautifully, this concept of referee versus coach. And so when we're talking about the traditional method, it really is kind of calling balls and strikes, so to speak, where either the young person meets their goals, they're either complying with what's laid out in the case plan or they don't. A probation officer makes record of it, and that may result in some form of sanctions and other responses. But in this case, when we're talking about a coach, it's a very different prospect. That means that you're invested in their success and you're working to help them succeed. So you're really not a neutral party in this. You're really in their corner and you're really trying to access all the resources at your disposal to help them succeed and to grow, understanding that perfection is not the goal, but to really help them get on a path for success. So that's just hopefully gives a little bit of context and insight into how we see this model being different from potentially the traditional approaches to case planning.
Thanks so much, Steve. And we will, I should have said this in the beginning, this event is being recorded. So that table that Steve was just going over will be available to you, and the entire recording will be available. Thank you, Steve. That's perfect. So we'll bring Jeanette Bocanegra up onto the stage now to hear from her, and I'll ask her a question. All right, Jeanette, I'm going to ask both your questions now so that I don't interrupt you, because that way I don't come back on the stage and interrupt your flow. So we have two questions for you, Jeanette. The first is family engaged case planning is premised on a broad definition of family. Caregivers are actually the ones that define their own family. Can you talk a bit about why a broad definition of family is so important? And then after that, if you can explain and talk a little bit about the continuum that your organization, Justice for Families, trains people on, the continuum of family engagement from interaction to engagement to partnership, that would be perfect. So I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Annie. And defining family, it's a broader definition than just blood relation. So partnering with families can not only be limited to just the parents and the legal guardians. You know, I talk about, or at Justice for Families, we talk about defining family. We no longer can define family as the traditional mom, dad, and siblings. We go beyond blood relation. We acknowledge that parents at times have difficult challenges understanding systems, and we need other family members to support our young people as well. We know that there's significant ties to communities, and young people can identify who those members in their community are that can support them. I grew up in a community where I looked at my my community as my family. I looked as my community as the ones who were taking care of me. We say it takes a village to raise children. So the definition of family is broader than just blood. We need to look at some of the examples of when young people identify with the community. So that's my brother, that's my aunt. It's not any blood relation, but that's the relationship that we hold in community. Who are those positive influencers that can surround our young people? We as parents, we want our children to succeed. So in our trainings at Justice for Families, the continuum to me is having, I know at probation we have an exit plan, but how do we interact with young people as probation officers? Do we interact with them? Do we engage them in the discussion of what are the things that you need to help you succeed? I also look at probation. I honor every probation officer that has logged in. Family engagement plan, case planning with young people takes dedication, takes trust and compassion. We're looking at the juvenile justice system and probation as a resource in our communities today. You know, Anna says our commissioner Bermudez said she does this work because of family. I embrace the work that probation is doing because it's beyond family and community. Briefly, some of the things that we talk about when partnering with young people is the questions: who do you consider as a family member? Who supports you when there's a need? You know, as probation officers, you know, we can ask our young people and look at ourselves. When there's an issue, who can we call at 2 a.m.? Who can we talk to beyond the Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, when we have some bad news or maybe some good news to share? Who are we responsible for in the community at home? Our young people today are facing many challenges. Again, I look at probation as a resource. We're making a system that can really support young people succeed. At the continuum of family engagement goes beyond interaction. Meaningful engagement with young people and their families means that we build a relationship with young people, means that we create mentorship, that we talk about their strength, that we talk about how do we define a future beyond bad decisions. We want to be able to create a circle of influence for young people that's beyond that engagement as well, that we as probation officers, youth and families together jointly can design a successful plan. I look back at some of my years working with families that I met during my years of navigating the justice system. One of the most difficult systems to navigate. It feels as if you were dropped in a foreign country and the language is different. The language is not understandable. So working with families and young people is also helping them understand some of these challenges, some of these practices. Long-term relationship continuum means supporting young people and families so that we can look at some of these policies. Today, we're not going to talk about policies. We're not going to talk about regulations, but how can I, as a probation officer, build a relationship with young people, build on their strength, make those connections in the community. The community has to be able to support the work that we're doing with young people at probation beyond their mandates. That partnership means being able to care for your community, being able to make sure that the schools in your community are doing well. Case planning means getting all those other systems of discipline that have no longer supported our young people to strengthen the work that you see as probation officer that are harming our young people. Incarceration no longer works for our young people. We want to reduce, and by reducing the harm is being able to build those relationships with our young people, that interaction, so we can hear what they're saying, so that young people are the instrumental piece that we need to be able to help them succeed, that the voices of families and the concerns that families have, that we can communicate. For far too long, there's been a distrust. And the long-term goal is to be able to build that partnership so that every young person has that opportunity to thrive. We no longer can allow incarceration to disrupt the development of our young people. Probation has an opportunity today to partner with communities, to partner with families, not to only interact, but the engagement and the long-term partnership to see all young people succeed. So this is a great opportunity that I see, here in New York. I brag about the things that are happening in New York. You don't have to be on probation to receive some of the services that the Neon offers. So when we look at case planning, the Continuum is develop that relationship with young people, develop that partnership. Let's look back at what interaction looks like. We may all say we all interact. What does engagement look like? Does the engagement look like a building relationship, building communication, trust? Let me get a little bit of water. I'm sorry. So again, we want to be able to collaboratively develop support for young people that can help them thrive. And you have a big task. And though my son is home, we want to disrupt and reduce the harm that many of the mandated programs that have been very punitive. We can look at what are some that we can be supportive to strengthen our young people. So let's look at how we interact as probation officers, designing a case. Do we hand it over to a young person? Do we build those relationships? Again, I'm going to emphasize relationship is important. This is an opportunity that we have to make sure that a generation, when Steve spoke about his young man at home, how we want to disrupt. No longer we can allow a system that has an opportunity to help young people drive. So let's look at how we build those engagement in order to build that strong partnership with community.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jeanette. That was great. And we're going to actually take this content from Jeanette and do a quick poll. So Jeanette, stay on with us while we do this poll. So this slide, and actually, if you can go back to the previous slide for just 1 minute. Sorry, one more back. Yeah, perfect. And so one more forward. Yeah, perfect. So this one, Jeanette was talking about that this continuum of case planning. So if it's interaction only, you'll see, and this will lead to our poll, that's what Steve was talking about. A probation officer mainly designing the case plan themselves based on risk assessment instruments or what's in the conditions of probation, handing it to the young person and family. That's interaction as case planning. Engagement, the PO is building, getting to know the young person, the family, asking them what their strengths are, what their needs are, and prioritizing that in the case plan. Partnership is actually, as Jeanette was saying, and Steve was referencing, is actually when the case plan itself is developed collaboratively, where the young people and the family members defined broadly are actually the partners that are deciding what's needed, when, how do we work through challenges. So we're going to do a poll right now where we're going to ask you, you can go to the next slide now. In your jurisdiction, where on this continuum of interaction, engagement, and partnership do you feel like your current case planning process falls? One would be, we're totally at interaction, right? We're doing the case plans, we're interacting, and that's where we are. We're doing the case plan and we're handing it to the family. And 5 would be, we are at full partnership. These collaboration with young people and the families based on strengths and needs. Okay. So the poll there, you can use the QR code to get into it, or if you'd rather, and all you do for the QR code is hold up your camera until it clicks and then press on the website, or you can go directly to www.menti.com and then use the code there. So you can do that right now. It's just one question. You put 1 through 5, and we're going to show the responses. So Jeanette, Jeanette, that was perfect. Thank you so much. I wish we could have so much more time for you to talk. You can take your camera and mic off while we go through the poll. So people go in to do the poll right now, and then the producers will pull up the results. Raven, do we have any results to show? All right, so these are coming in. We have, okay, so 39 so far, keep answering. But the largest number of people, percentage of people are saying that they're about in the middle between interaction and partnership. So doing some level of engagement, but not quite at full partnership. We do have some 5s, which I'm so curious about to hear where you're coming from and what you're doing. And then we have some people being really candid in the 1 and 2s, right? We're just mainly at interaction, like maybe approaching engagement. So this gives a sense, and this is definitely what we see nationally from people. Although I will say even sites that have been doing family engaged case planning for a long time probably would not even grade themselves at a 5, although we'll hear from Anna from New York City in a bit if that's the case. But we really given these answers. So you can keep going into that, but we do want to pull Miracle up now to hear from her next. And we are tracking your questions. We're going to get to as many of those as we can. I don't know, producers, if you can on the back end to us, let us know if there's a way we can actually go in and answer some of these, or if we just have to wait until the end, but you can just send a text on that. Miracle, thank you for being here again with us today. So the question for you is family engaged case planning centers youth voice. What does that term youth voice really mean?
Thank you, Annie. So youth voice is very simple. In the terms of how I look at it, it means that youth are the experts. And by experts, I mean youth are the experts when it comes to their lived experience. A lot of times, well, I'm gonna just speak from my personal experience and how it was for me when I first interacted with my probation officer. It was a lot of like telling me what I should do, how I should, with not even asking me, hey, what happened? What do you think? How do you feel? Right? Versus going back to that partnership. And a lot of times youth know what we don't need, and we have an idea of what we need. However, we do look to the adults that we're entrusted in for guidance, right? For guidance on what does that look like for me as far as in a healthy way, right? Because as youth, we have our own coping mechanisms, and that doesn't mean they're healthy. So when it comes, it's really crazy to me how we have this system around youth, yet they're not including the expert into the conversation, where youth are surrounded by these adults making decisions about their lives and the effect of how it can impact them, right? Yet we don't even think to consider, what does the youth believe that they need? What do they think? And really, I feel like that's where the probation officers come in. They're supposed to help guide the youth to find that answer for themselves. That's another thing. We don't need probation officers telling us what to do, what we shouldn't do, because if that was the case, that could have worked. We wouldn't have ended up in a system to begin with. We already have, depending on every youth circumstance and different, and depending on who those adults are in their lives to guide them, there's a reason why the youth ended up in the system. So going back to also what Jeanette brought about village, now that a youth is in the system, a probation officer should view themselves as a part of that youth's village. And in being a part of that youth's village, they have such a huge impact on where this youth, their life can go, right? And there's only 2 directions, up or down. right? Do we want them to evolve from where they're at? Because we also know that the youth are not defined by their mistakes, right? And I think that's another thing we need to encourage youth to understand that. And the experience of their lived experience as adults in the room, they really need to just be quiet. Just to be very frank, they need to be quiet and listen to the youth. And before even listening to youth, create a safe space for the youth. That's another thing. A lot of youth, and we talk about the families, already have a very negative outlook on the system, right? So it is up to the adult to really break down that stereotype and show them that, hey, you know what? I'm gonna let you tell me what you need from me. As a probation officer, that could help. That could go a long way in how the relationship with the youth could go. And that brings me to my next point when we talk about how do we center youth voice. Uh, for adults, the first step is humbling yourself. Yeah, we know a lot, but we don't know everything, especially when it comes to that youth and their lived experience. You don't, you're a student. You need to listen and learn from this youth. What were their triggers? How did they end up here? Okay, as I'm listening to the youth express themselves and share their experience, I should be taking mental notes of, okay, this is where I can help, right? And then even with where you believe you can help, then having that conversation with the youth, like, hey, like these are things that I took note of. What do you think? Right? You constantly had to keep the youth involved versus just telling them like, hey, this is what it needs to be, and this is what it's not going to be. And let's be real, we were all teenagers. Teenagers are very rebellious in a sense that, teenagers think they know it all as well. But that's also a defense mechanism, right? Of feeling of needing to feel like they have to know everything. And I feel like that comes from, again, not having the safe space, right? So I remember when I would come in, my first probation officer, it was the same question every time. How are you? Is there anything, has anything changed? I'm a youth. All I'm thinking is I want to get out of there. I'm going to tell you whatever you need to hear. So with those surface-based questions, you're going to get a surface-based answer. And in that, no rapport established. I was like, how I felt every time I saw her was like I was just another case number. Because I what youth also don't understand is, as probation officers, you guys do have a right, but that's not the youth's problem, or like let them to concern themselves with, because they're the ones that are in your hands, right? So as the probation, I feel like it takes a lot of setting the ego to the side, humbling yourself to really know, like, you know what, I'm not the expert in this situation, right? I'm actually the student. I need to learn from the youth and how I can help this youth learn how to make better decisions for themselves starting right now and onto their future. And there's the quote right here put up by David. I love what he said, and I want to really emphasize where he says our responses to young people are fundamentally different when we categorize them first. Like, that's the first thing. We're categorizing them first. Not our ego, not what we believe is right. No. We're categorizing them first. The youth come first. The whole reason why we're in, like, why all of us are included in this, in the system, have the roles that we have, is to help the youth. All our work we do is around the youth. So it's really crazy to me how the youth doesn't come first a lot. The youth comes last, right? The only time the youth is then included is when they hear what the decisions have been made for them, versus including them in every step when it comes to what decisions should be made, because that's a decision that's on their life and they need to be included. And with that also, like, aside, so that's the first step for me, is when it comes to centering youth voice, is humility. The second step will also be reassessing your approach, right? We're talking about strength-based approaches. Anybody, not just will feel offended when you're approaching them with a list of things they did wrong. That's just across the board as humans. Think of it if it was your boss coming to you and just say, hey, you A, B, C, D, like just running down a list of all the things you did wrong, not highlighting anything of anything of your strengths, anything of your accomplishments, anything of looking at it from a very critical point, like a standpoint, because there's okay feedback, but feedback is also very balanced, right? And before you can even give a youth, or before a youth can even really trust and hear, the growth areas that they have, you have to establish that rapport first. You can't just telling the youth that you need to do this and that. Oh, you haven't been going to school, like your grades are bad. Okay, why don't we first start with the questions? Hey, like I noticed your attendance here is pretty low. Like, what's going on? I know that when we interact together, like you express how passionate you are about this, and is there anything going on that I don't know about, that I should know about? Like, it's simple in my head to where it needs to be questions. We need to question. We need to ask questions, and then we need to end those questions. Taking those mental notes, you're highlighting the responses you're getting from the youth, to then now you're able to really actually ask questions about just them. And going into the next slide, there's different examples of how you can ask strength-based questions. And it's simple. That really comes from getting to know your youth. Very simple, like you get to know anyone else, like you're going on a date, or like when you're meeting a new colleague on a project, you're gonna ask questions to get to know them. So I feel like before trying to like talk about the youth's case, it's very important to also first get to know the youth that you are working with, right? Give them that respect to know that, hey, you're still a person too. I understand the circumstance you're in, but that doesn't take away the humanity aspect of it. And so I really just want to wrap up with just leaving you guys with the thought of like, how would you want somebody to approach you when it comes to your growth areas, and how do you see yourself then approaching your youth, right? And like I said, there's different questions here. I also think it's really nice to get creative, think outside of the box when you're getting to know your youth, right? Like for me, I had a second probation officer, super cool. First thing he said to me was like, hey, I like your J's. And him complimenting my J's. Now our whole conversation, we're talking about shoes, which led me to open up about other things I like. And he, not only are we like just conversing about shoes and my interests, he's taking mental notes to where then he's responding to me with like, hey, I noticed like you really have a big interest with them. Have you ever thought about pursuing this or this? Right? They're seeing that for the adults and the probation officer to connect the dots, help the youth to connect those dots, help the youth in guiding them to understand like, these are your strengths that I recognize that you have, because a lot of times youth may not know what their strengths are. So I think I can end it there because I know we have a little bit more time, and I see Annie, you came on. That's a bit of where I stand when it comes to what is youth voice and why we should center them.
That's perfect, Miracle. We need a whole session with you to hear more from this. And I hope you can see the applause, the clapping hands on the bottom. That was really excellent. Thank you so much, Miracle. Again, wish we had a lot more time. So we're going to turn to Anna. And Anna, what I'm going to do, because you already have, I'm going to ask you your question. And then in your question, in your answer, which you're probably already anticipating doing, there are some questions that have come through that I think you're going to address. So I just want to call those out. One is this sort of tension between efficiency and quality and relationships, right? Another is the length of time, both on probation, but to build the relationship. And another, I would say there was one about the notion of training or educating caregivers, which I also have heard you talk about a lot, right? So I know there's a lot in there, but I think it's already encapsulated in what you were going to talk about. So for Anna, there's so much that you could speak about. New York City's been doing, this model and evolving it and always trying to do better and better for a long time. For purposes of today, because we can't get into everything, can you talk a little bit about those first 4 to 6 weeks of case planning, goal of the youth, the family, and relationship building? And Anna, I'm going to keep an eye, this is hard, but let's at least try to keep like 2 or 3 minutes at the end, to try to get to questions that maybe aren't encapsulated in what you're going to talk about.
Okay, this is speed dating for everybody. Thank you, Miracle, for all that you said, Jeanette, as well. So basically, what we've tried to do, well, we knew we needed to improve the way both to make our case planning more youth-centered and family-centered. So we started working on this back in 2010-11, and we did a few things that we're trying to do at the same time, right? So as we were trying to work on improving the youth voice into the case plans, we felt we needed to do that first before even trying to engage parents. We still knew that obviously that the children, because we're talking about children, even if they're, like 16, 17, people forget these are children, that they're part of family systems, right? And again, like Jeanette said, family defined in any number of ways. Who are the champions for these young people? And we needed to identify them as well and work with them in a more holistic way. So, and to answer the poll a little bit, we created something that on a system level is pretty close to partnership. And we're still sort of in the between engagement and partnership in our case planning process. So let me address that. So we used some money that we had to contract with nonprofit organizations to have parent coaches, essentially, and Jeanette was one of the first ones. So Jeanette's in each of our county offices, and they're there every day, 5 days a week, and they work with probation officers and the families, of course, to help the families navigate systems, to the question about training, quote unquote, training parents and caregivers to work with probation. They do that. They bridge that gap to the point we had one parent coach in Brooklyn who lived in the same building as one of the kids on probation. And, the kid started thinking, essentially thinking that she was her PO too, like that kind of stuff. So it was really it became a joint effort to have the family be successful. And so as we were working on also templates, at the time we were not automated, sort of like paper case plans, which, it's always it's a challenge to use paper case plans, but that's another story. We were also at the same time looking for sort of, I guess, a theory to ground all of this, and our staff and Deputy Commissioner Janine Gray is at the forefront of all of this, and you'll hear from her, some people will hear from her later. We adopted a model of service that had been used in child welfare. We applied it. We're, I think, the only jurisdiction, or one of the only jurisdictions, to have applied it to juvenile justice, which is the Youth Thrive model, which focuses on developing resiliency in the young people and their families, and it's also family-centered and trauma-informed. So that's been in the process. We have trained trainers within our staff. It's always and it has become the center of how we do case reviews as well as case planning, right? And then in the first 4 to 6 weeks that a young person's on probation, the only thing, absent true crisis, we get convinced too often that something that seems urgent is a crisis, but it's not. It's like, we're talking homelessness, potential overdosing tomorrow, that kind of stuff, right? Absent that, we're spending the time to getting to know the family and the young person. And then towards the end of that time is when the first quote unquote case plan that evolves over time is put together. And the case plan never deals with more than three, is not intended to deal with more than three, what we call, needs, because they're attached to the risk assessment that we call skills building. We don't call them needs, right? And the youth always has to choose one of them. There's also, it's grounded in an aspiration for life, right? That then the family's also engaged in what is the family's aspiration for the young person. Because no matter what, as dysfunctional perhaps as some families can be, parents always want what's best for what they believe is best for their children, and something good for their children, always something better than they had, right? So extracting that becomes really important. And that's something that we're still working on, because we've had so much work to do also on the youth voice part, and what Miracle spoke so beautifully about probation officers being humble and curious about the young person, curious about what works in their life, that then can be capitalized on. And that's also why we incorporate that focus in the case plan, right? That we call an action plan, to open this up from a space of curiosity and engagement, right? So I might just stop there. In terms of efficiency versus, if you don't invest, we have found out that if you don't invest the time at that point, you're never going to get anywhere with anything else. You can refer a kid to 10,000 programs and that kind of stuff, but if there's not that connective tissue of, I can kind of convince you to go there because I know what your goals are, it's just not going to work anyway. So
that's perfect. And Anna, I wonder if you could say just 1 minute about, we didn't show the last slide, which is fine. I think it's good to allow for some questions, but a little bit about that culture shift, right? So I'll just ask it this way. Could a jurisdiction do family engaged case planning without taking on the broader culture shift of how families and young people are viewed and treated across the board?
No. The simple answer is no. You have to engage in that. You really have to speak to and be brutally honest. Like, what are the assumptions that we're making about young people coming into our systems and families? Mm-hmm. And for example, a typical one is they're here because their families are screwed up. Yeah. And that's just not, 9 out of 10 times, that's not the case. There's always some functioning, that happens. And then families know when there's, things that are not working and who can come in and, sort of fill in that gap, but they're not always asked. A parent who has substance abuse issues, it does not have substance abuse issues 24/7. There's some time in the day, in the week, or whatever. And so that's why we create a circle of influence around the child, to see who their champions are. And there might be champions for this and then champions for that. And, then we spread the wealth.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Anna. So we do have a couple minutes where I want to at least go to a few. I think what we're going to do, so the answer to that, will the PowerPoint be shared? The video, the recording will certainly be shared. And I'm a consultant, so I can't totally answer this, but I'm going to say yes to the PowerPoint, and we'll talk to Casey about a way to make it available as well. And then the other ones, I'm going to take a stab at some of these. So within this model, what would be the optimal number for an average caseload? So we did answer this a little bit further down, even though it's not supposed to be the space for that. But you'll see in Casey's vision for probation transformation, which is the white paper that came out in 2018, there is an average caseload that's recommended that's about between 8 to 12 for a whole lot of reasons, one of which, much of which is what Steve already talked about, but also to be able to do this model. I also would encourage folks to look at the practice guide around family engaged case planning on this question of, someone had written in, is there any practice of coaching / teaching family members how to collaborate with the probation system? So this is a really tricky question And the practice guide gets into it well by giving an example of, in New York City, lots of systems will introduce things about teaching or training or coaching parents how to engage. And they can come off as condescending, offensive, you name it, depending on how they're done. And in New York City, what Anna was talking about is where caregivers who had gone through the system were there as peer supports for caregivers that were going through the system now, because they knew what it was like and they could be alongside them to navigate it. So there's a lot of other good questions in here. We will take on producers if we can save these, and we'll think of ways to follow up with folks if they put their names in. And also a lot of the information is directly in the practice guide. So I'd love to just bring up the speakers one last time just to see them and wave them off and clap them off. And hard to believe that we're already at an hour. We had 350 people, participants on this webinar, which is really exciting. And I just want to give them a big thanks if they're still available to put on their cameras and be back. They might be off getting some chocolate or coffee or something, which is totally fair too. So Miracle, if you're there as well, we'll clap you off. And you all are getting lots of hand claps on the bottom. So big thanks to all of you. Quick shout out for probation transformation sites that have a delegation of people coming to part 2. Remember, it is a different link. So go into the email reminder you got, go into that link. You have a half an hour break and then we'll start. So Jeanette, Anna, Steve, and Miracle, big thanks to you. Much appreciated. See some of you shortly. Okay, have a good day.